All right, it's Halloween week, and we're going to be talking about something a little scary, which is your
My
fears.
face?
And no, Ken, not your face. That we'll leave that for another episode. Okay. Actually, I don't think people want, we see enough of it. We don't need to go into a deep dive. You know what I mean?
Okay, what are we really
No,
talking
but
about?
we're really talking today about 4 fears for undermining your success. And we thought this was appropriate. It's Halloween week. Let's talk about fears and dive a little bit deep. And we might get a little vulnerable today. I don't know. We're going to see what happens.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask you a lot of questions. It's going to be great. Put you on the hot seat.
Oh, amazing. Fantastic. Can't wait.
Welcome to another episode of Focus on This, the most productive podcast on the internet so you can banish distractions, get the right stuff done, and finally start loving Mondays. I'm Ken Freire here with Marissa Hyatt. Hey,
happy Monday. Happy Halloween week. Do you celebrate Halloween? Do you do the trick-or-treating? Do you do all the candy and all the things?
You know, my wife and I have debated it back and forth with our kids from just like our faith background and stuff like that. Last year was the first time we kind of did it. Yeah. Kind of meaning it was total accidental. We just were walking around and we started going into doors, and next thing you know, we started trick-or-treating. We're like, all right, we just did that, So we'll see. It's conversations that happen every year around our house. Yeah. It's fun.
So I personally love it. I think it's so fun. First of all, Halloween as a kid is like the best, it's candy. If you have never watched Jerry Seinfeld's stand-up bit on Halloween, highly, highly recommend it. Go on YouTube, find a clip. It is hysterical. And he talks about the psychology of kids during Halloween and how they're just obsessed with getting more candy. And it is hilarious. But I loved it growing up. And as an adult, it's kind of an interesting holiday because if you don't have kids, you're kind of like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to do tonight. Maybe go to a party and dress up. But I did that in my early 20s, haven't really done that since. So it's typically now let's make chili. I usually will do some kind of a fun cocktail and have some friends over, and then we hand out candy to kids in my neighborhood. So I kind of love Halloween. I think it's like everybody becomes a kid again. I don't like any of the spooky stuff.
Yeah, so neither do I. I think that's the big thing for me.
Yeah.
It's all the spooky things. Like my daughter's dressing up as princesses and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, that's cute, It's all the spooky things. But with that in mind, I'm curious, before we do a deep dive, what stuff scares you, Marissa, on a day-to-day basis?
Oh my gosh. What are some fears that I have?
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about fears. You might as well just start talking about our random fears.
Okay, well, I do have a slight fear of heights. Nothing crazy. I feel like it's a healthy, normal fear to have, to not want to be on the edge of something. But that definitely scares me. I'll never forget when we went to Peru. Some of my family and I went to Peru a few years ago, and we went to Machu Picchu, which is incredible. But driving up, you have to go through this crazy road all the way up the mountain, and it's like switchbacks, and there is no guardrail
at all. Awesome.
And there is a complete drop off, and they're in these buses. So they're huge. They can barely make the turns. And I was clenching every single muscle in my body, terrified that we were just going to accidentally, a little bit of our tire was going to go off the edge, and then we were, gone. And I just had to keep reminding myself, these guys do this all day long, every single day. They are pros. We're going to make it up. We're going to make it down. If it was that, unsafe, this would not be one of the top destinations in the world.
Well,
but I do have a little bit of fear, of heights. Nothing crazy though. What about you?
To add to your fear, the next time you ever do that, you should always check the bus tires.
Oh my gosh, don't tell me this stuff.
Listen, I used to take mission trips all the time with young kids, young teenagers. And one of the things that we were trained to do is whenever we got on our vehicle, any type of vehicle, make sure you check the tires and how much tread they have. Because we do stuff like that, and you're just
tip.
Hey, we're going to go off a cliff. But my biggest fear.
I actually know it.
Do you remember?
Isn't it drowning?
Yes. like deep ocean. I was even thinking about this when I looked at this. I was like, oh gosh. I was like already getting my palms were sweaty just thinking about getting
Are you
stuck.
the kind of person that are you okay with like water you can see in? Or are you just like any water? Or is it specifically water where you can't see the bottom?
You
Like
know,
how do you do in a lake?
anything after like 4 feet, I'm a little like,
Okay, got it. Got
It's
it.
better if I could see it. If
Yeah.
like here in Tennessee, they love promoting that we have like the most biodiverse like rivers and water bodies of water.
Oh,
I'm
I didn't
like,
even know this.
oh yeah, it's the most. All I hear is I'm gonna get eaten by a parasite. Like that's all I hear. So
That's
I'm
true.
like, I'm
That's
never
true.
getting in there.
That's hilarious. Well, obviously, we're kind of joking about, I mean, we're not joking. These are real fears for us, but fear, for sure, it's designed to help us survive, right? So, like I was saying, I think my fear of heights is a healthy fear because I don't want to fall off a cliff and die. And you have a healthy fear of not wanting to drown. And so, it's all designed to help us survive. But unfortunately, there's these kind of fears that we have about our survival. And then there's a lot of unconscious fear that happens that is not really so much about about our survival, but it typically is the stuff that keeps us from what we actually want in our lives and creating the things. It's a fear that ends up holding us back. And so today we're going to talk about 4 fears that might really be undermining your success. And I'm really excited about this episode because I think that fear, if you can overcome these fears, your chances of success, your chances of being able to achieve what you want and create the life that you want is 10x than if these are ruling and you're unconscious of what's happening.
Yeah. So let's jump in. Let's talk about the first fear of failure. I feel like all these podcast episodes recently, we're just talking about me.
We're just shining a light on all of Ken, and we're just saying we're going to have a therapy session together today.
I was supposed to ask you the questions.
Right.
Okay. So fear of failure. I think, when we think about this, it comes from perfectionism, right? Ultimately.
Right.
But what we're really avoiding is shame when we think about failure. And let me kind of walk us down why this is important. If you ever heard of this concept, guilt is about what you've done wrong. Shame is you feeling wrong as an individual. And when you fail at something, right, you feel like your identity is being attacked. So a fear of failure is feeling embarrassed about not wanting your identity to kind of be put on display for whatever reason the failure that came across. So what we have to realize is like, man, there's not the fear of failure is just kind of the top layer. Underneath it though is shame of like you don't have what it takes, or you're not good enough, or you're not worthy enough to actually accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. So because of that, you just run away.
Yeah.
And I think fear of failure holds a lot of people back. It held me back for years. And if
Yep.
anything, it holds me back still sometimes. If I'm not cognizant of it, I'm just like, oh gosh, should I do this? Should I not? There's certain passion projects that I had in my heart for years to do that it was like taking me forever to do. And finally, I'm like, I just need to pull the trigger on it. I'm like, I just need to do this. I need to make things happen because I was just afraid, afraid that like people would reject me, or afraid that like it's not going to be good enough. But like if you were listening to last week's episode, we're saying that like one of the changes we need to make is from perfect to being good enough. Like good enough allows you to have iterations about things and change and more. Marissa, when you think about fear of failure, I'm just going to ask you because I know I struggle with it. How do you see this happen in your life or just in other people's lives in like the Enneagram spectrum?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of this, I don't know. I've always thought I was an Enneagram 8, and I kind of think the more I learn, the more I know about myself. I think I'm more in the 3 space.
Really?
And yeah, and I think that this embarrassment aspect really speaks to me because that is such a fear of a 3, which is the fear of being embarrassed. That's like their worst nightmare is to be embarrassed. And I don't know if that's my worst nightmare, but it sounds pretty awful, I think the other thing for me with this, as adults, we have not exercised our muscle enough of trying things
Yeah.
and not being good at things. Like we've talked about this on the podcast before, but it is so normal as adults to feel like I'm supposed to be good right out of the gate. Like that's what I expect of myself and that's what I expect often of other people, but it's so unrealistic. Like how we learn is often through failing and through trying, right? And if we're so terrified of failure, the likelihood of us actually being willing to work up enough courage to actually go try the thing that we're so scared of failing at, it's slim to none, right? Like that's going to kill any part of us that's going to be willing to actually go try. And I think this shows up often in our careers, right? Like that's to me what I typically go to is like, oh, the fear of failing in your career. But the truth is, this shows up in so many other areas of our lives. And you kind of spoke a little bit to this, Kim, but this can look like the fear of rejection. So that can happen often in our relationships, whether it be with friendships, like going out on a limb and inviting somebody who you don't know out to coffee or trying to get to know somebody, your fear of, the kind of that rejection. Or within romantic relationships, you may be so scared of failing within those that you're like, I'm not going to go there. I'm not even going to go try that thing. And it can also show up in our hobbies or in our, kind of like more playful areas of our life. If we're scared of failing and being embarrassed, then we're not usually going to go try the things. And this is something that personally I've really been dealing a lot with. I shared a few episodes back. I've been taking salsa dancing lessons, and that's been a new hobby for me over the last couple of months. I'm loving it. But this is literally every week I'm looking this fear straight in the eye because it's kind of unique in the class that I'm in. There's all different levels. And so there's people who are kind of beginners like I am. There's people who've been in this for months and months and months or a year, and they're way more advanced. And so I'm definitely scared of being embarrassed, looking stupid, and ultimately failing. And let me tell you, when you're doing basically speed dancing, where you're dancing with somebody for like a minute and then you switch partners and you have all of a sudden somebody who's way more experienced than you and they're trying to twirl you around and do all these moves you don't know, the fear of failure, the fear of embarrassment is so real. And I just have to remind myself, like, this is how I learn. I learn by not being good. And that's how I actually get better.
Yeah, man. Marissa, I remember the first time you told me that you were going to do the salsa dancing classes.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, it's just going to be like a one-off thing, you know?
Right.
But you recently signed up for like the advanced class for another 6 months
Yeah.
or something like that. And I'm just
Yep.
like, wow, way to conquer your fear, right? Of
Yeah.
failing in this area. And, it takes so much courage. I know, like I have it too when I think about like, oh, I want to learn a new dance.
Mm,
It's so hard for me because I'm like, I'm going to look like an idiot right now.
totally.
I'm like, oh, I'm off rhythm. Like there's all these things that come up and it's like, okay, how do we normalize failure? Right. I
Right.
think that's going to be the big thing here is like, if how do we help? Like, what do you do to overcome fear of failure? The first thing is
Mm-hmm.
just normalize it. Like, it's
Yeah.
okay. The thing that I tell myself all the time is my identity is not based off of what I do.
Yeah.
It's who I am. So like whenever I do stuff, and this is why most people who know me, like I would do a lot of embarrassing things because things don't bother me. Like you ask me you dare me to go do something, I'm like, sure, whatever. That stuff
Yeah.
doesn't bother me. But the stuff that does is like when I know I should be good at something and I mess up.
Yeah. Me too. I'm really similar in that. Like I've done this, where I'm out with friends and they're like, "Oh, I dare you to go, do whatever." And I'm like, "All right, sure." I don't care because that to me doesn't I'm not supposed to be good. I'm not supposed to
Yeah.
look a certain way in that moment. It's a silly playful moment, but it is exactly those moments where you feel like you're supposed to be good at something
Yeah.
that this shows up.
And like even both of us, you're working in marketing, I'm working in sales. There's stuff that I do sometimes in sales. I was like, oh, I know way better, and I should have done that way better. And I have to
Yeah.
remind myself, like, okay, that doesn't affect who I am. I could get
I
it
think
was
this is
learning.
kind of imposter syndrome too.
Yeah.
Like so many of us feel this and earlier this year I was promoted to CMO and I had a ton of imposter syndrome. in that. And honestly, if I look back at my career, anytime I've been promoted into a new role, I've felt that sense of I'm not the one to do this, you know? And ultimately what that is my fear of failing.
Yeah.
And it's a survival mechanism. Like it's designed to help me from totally failing and then not being able to provide for myself and all those things. Like if I really go to the primal level. But failure is so normal. It's part of the process. And I think like what is so beautiful of this is if you are failing, it means that you're trying.
Yeah.
And it means typically that you're learning, which I love. My brother-in-law years ago decided to take up surfing lessons, and he was living in California at the time, and really wanted to do better at surfing. And so he started learning, and he sucked. He just kept failing over and over and over, and he was falling, and it was embarrassing, it was painful, and all these things. And his surfing instructor at one point, because he was getting super frustrated with himself, at one point he was like, quit that. Like, you don't need to be beating yourself up right now. What you need to actually tell yourself every single time you fall off the surfboard or you can't get up in the first place is, I'm still learning. And he literally made him say that every single time he fell. He would have to get back up and he would go, I'm still learning. And so it's kind of an inside joke in our family now. Anytime somebody messes up or, fails or whatever, it's like, okay, well, I'm still learning. Like, it's not over yet. Right. And the good news is you're learning in the process.
Marissa, it's funny. We were doing an event a while back, and I remember your dad saying that to me. He was just like, hey, you're still learning. I'm like, okay. And I think you laughed or something like that. I'm like, what just happened here? But
well, now you know.
now I know.
Now you know.
Now I know the backstory. I love it. Okay. So that's fear number one, right? That's holding us back is the fear of failure. Mm-hmm. Fear number two that can hold us back is fear of letting people down.
Ooh. Okay. I think this one is really good.
Talk to us about it.
Well, this is one of the biggest reasons that we end up overworking or overcommitting ourselves is because it turns into us feeling like we need to people please.
Yeah.
Like we are so afraid of either rejection or I don't know, we want, like, probably on a really primal level, it's our need for connection, and we're scared that if we let people down, that they're going to end up rejecting us. And then we're like cast out of, our tribe, our group. Right. And then we can't survive. Like, this is what's so crazy about fears is you think it's just this kind of surface thing. And when you drill really down on a primal level, it's like, oh, it's because my brain is actually trying to keep me alive and it doesn't want me cast out of the community to where I can't survive, but this is so common and we see this so often, especially with high achievers, and they feel like they need to say yes so many times because we're afraid that people are going to be upset with us. They're going to think poorly. They're going to think, in our work lives, she doesn't have what it takes. She's not smart enough. She can't do this. And so we feel like we're having to prove ourselves. It's like, I've got to prove this, or I don't want to let this person down. So yeah, sure. I'll take it on. And it just ends up leading to total burnout.
Yeah.
Yeah,
100%. When I think about people pleasing, I think about people wanting affirmation and acceptance. Mm. And if you say no to that person, you feel like, oh, I'm going to get denied their affirmation or their acceptance of me. Right. So that's why we end up saying yes. Even like, I don't know if this happened to you, Marissa. Boys did this a lot. Right. And we just talked about getting dared. I got dared a lot. And sometimes it was probably just because I wanted the affirmation acceptance of my friends. So I'll be like, oh, yeah, sure. I'll go do that. Because I didn't want to feel like I was going to be on the outside. Mm-hmm. And now as I've grown up, I said for years, I was like, oh no, I'm not a people pleaser. I'm not a people pleaser. I don't I don't really care what people think. But to come to find out, the people that I have the hardest time saying no to are my closest friends, my family, and like my coworkers, right? Because if you guys need something, like you're my inner circle right now. So I was like, oh, you need something? I'll stop everything that I'm doing. And I could accidentally, without paying attention, surrender all my time and my priorities for the sake of other people. And at times that's okay, right? Like it needs to happen if a catastrophe happens, right? But if it's turns from a season to all of a sudden a lifestyle, that's when burnout happens. And that's when
Definitely.
you get stuck in this people pleasing mode and you never know how to get out of it. So
Yeah.
how do you solve it? What are some ways that you have found to like kind of thicken your skin and not be a people pleaser or not letting people down?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, it's recognizing where that urge is coming from in yourself, why you feel the need to overcommit or overextend yourself. Um, often this is deeply rooted in our past. Like there's something deep in our childhood, within our, nuclear family that created this need in us to people please. And one of the best ways that we can deal with this is inside of therapy, processing through this stuff. And if you're somebody listening and you've never gone to therapy, I really want to encourage you to look into this because therapy can be such a powerful tool. I've done all different types of therapy. And I find that it enables me to be more self aware and to help me have better boundaries in my life because it's getting me in touch with what's actually important to me and taking kind of that noise, those like learned behaviors, that learned fear that we have, and kind of like peeling it back and helps me discover who I really am and what I really want underneath. And so often we think, well, gosh, I don't want to let these people down, which in a lot of ways is coming from a good place. But if we really dig, it's probably not actually. And I think that therapy is such a great place to help us do that. I've certainly known in my life that that's helped. A great book that could be helpful is the book Boundaries. This is such a phenomenal book to help you create those boundaries in your life. If that's helpful, if you find yourself creeping into people pleasing, that's a good book. Um, and there's another book that's called Codependent No More.
Oh,
And it is really powerful and will help you realize kind of those codependent tendencies that so many of us have and we're just completely unconscious to.
hmm. That sounds like a
So,
fascinating book. I need to put it on my
yeah,
list. I read the
yeah,
Boundaries book.
it's
He's created
yeah,
like a whole
a whole world of
enterprise.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's got like boundaries for dating, boundaries for couples, boundaries for
Yes.
kids. Like it's a whole thing
Oh, we
now.
need them for just about everything. So,
Exactly. uh,
um, yeah, so I think that therapy is huge. And then really knowing your priorities. Like, knowing who you are, what you stand for, what matters to you. And when you know those things, you're going to be able to say no better. And we've talked about this a few episodes ago when we talked about boundaries. No doesn't have to be a dirty word. It doesn't have to feel bad to the person that you're saying no to. It doesn't have to feel bad to you to say it. There's ways and there's strategies, and through therapy, through reading, there's ways that you can make a no feel good to both people involved.
yeah. You know what I have found is that when you start to actually let people know what you stand for, the right people will come by your side. So it's easier for
Yeah.
you to actually say no to because they get it. I think
Hmm.
Full Focus is a great example of that. We have a huge value on the double win, winning at work and succeeding in
Right.
life. What that means practically for us is for those of us who have family, y'all are very flexible, right? Like it's like,
Hmm.
oh, we get it. You had like a kid got sick. We have to move stuff around. We got sick. We have to, like
Right.
it's very flexible. And I'm like, oh, they know my priorities. They know what's important to
Yeah.
us. And we're able to communicate in that way. So it's easier to say no or like, hey, I can't do this, or hey, I can't come into work for whatever reason. Now that
Right.
doesn't give us excuses to slack off or anything like that, right? But because everybody knows their priorities, we actually get more laser focused when we are
Yeah.
there and we are giving our attention. Fear number 3, fear of the unknown. I feel like we're just talking about all my fears. So
Yeah.
uh,
I feel this one a lot.
it is. I think both of us like control. We
Definitely.
like.
Don't call me out like that, okay?
That's why I said both of us. I was trying to be
Yeah,
inclusive. I really meant
yeah.
you, but both of us
Right,
like.
okay.
But this is actually one of the biggest reasons people resist change, right?
Mhm.
Because we like to feel safe with familiarity,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So going out of our comfort zone or doing something unknown, or even when circumstances happen to us and now we have no control and we don't know what's supposed to happen, there's a lot of fear. I mean, I'm not going to get political, but for a lot of people right now, right? The fear of who's going to be in office in the next month or two terrifies them, and they're not making moves. They're like, well, I don't know what goals I should have. And they're like, I'm doomsday prepping, right? There's like all this crazy stuff that's happening.
It's like paralyzing.
It's paralyzing. So like, and that's just one example, but how many, like for me, going back to my fear of water, sometimes I don't go out and enjoy it, right? Because I don't know what's underneath. And I'm like, I kid you not, I once watched a video about parasites going into your body from like a river. And ever since then, I get like terrified when I go in the river. I'm like, this thing is going to go up one of my holes.
Oh my gosh. Well, that might have been not to freak you out, but they do also go, like they can get inside of from your feet. So just, just saying. Okay.
Another reason why.
We all have parasites. It's normal. It's happened. It's just part of being a living creation. And,
stop.
All right, we have a whole ecosystem happening. Okay. Honestly, I really have a fear of the unknown. And one of the ways that this really shows up, if I'm vulnerable for me, is when I start dating somebody. And it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know what this is going to look like. I don't know how they're going to be. I'm still trying to get to know them. How are they going to interact with my family? How are they going to interact with my friends, my life? How are our lives going to integrate? It's just like all these questions, and it can be paralyzing for real. And I think that I see this show up. I've experienced this firsthand, that if you don't work through that, you'll just bail. And I've seen this in past relationships of mine where, we're really starting to get connected, and there's a fear of this unknown future of like, what does this look like? And there's a massive fear of being hurt. And so it's so scary. And, I've been with guys who have not been able to work through that. I've also been in situations where I haven't been able to work through that. And it's like, no, I can't. It's too overwhelming. And so we tend to pull back. We tend to put our guards up and get small. It's like we go into like survival rather than a place of expansion, which is the exact opposite of this, which is like, I'm going to open myself up to this unknown. And it's so interesting because so much of this is really stepping into a place of courage and a place of trust. And I think a lot of what we can do to kind of combat this is really visualizing the future that we want. And if we are able to visualize it, we can often let our desire outpace the fear. And this is often easier said than done. Sometimes, especially for different people, visualization can be really, really hard. For me, visualization can actually be, it's very easy for me to visualize the future. Almost to a detriment, like sometimes it can be crippling because I can visualize a future that's terrifying to me. But I think one of the best ways that we can do this is crafting the vision that we want for our future. And so through tools like our life focus process, you can really create this vision for your future that's exciting, that's personally thrilling, that you do feel like you have some sense of control over. Obviously, you, at the end of the day, you don't, but visualizing the future that you want can help reorient you, help the unknown feel less scary, less unsafe, and it can give you a sense of grounding in that process.
Yeah, I think the beauty of visualization, when you talk about it, Marissa, and we've talked about it a lot in previous podcasts and offline, right, is that like you are committing to the truth of what's real.
Right.
And you're like, what is it? What is reality, and what is it that I truly want? So a lots of times, because of fear, right, it's on the unknown, we end up creating these fantasies in our life, right? And these narratives that we actually have to break, right? Like, for example, one of the fears that I used to have on the unknown is that like, well, I'm always going to fail, right? Or like, I'm always going to trying to go to something, and I'm never going to get to what I want. But the reality is that like, I'm like, well, what is true? I know I'm capable. I know I have the skills. I know that I can do it if I put enough effort into it. Okay, that I do know. Let me visualize my success. Let me visualize these things. But man, for someone who's an Enneagram, like control is a big deal for me. And like when I don't have control, everything in me wants to try to grasp at something.
Yeah.
I think for me, one of those is like my healing, for certain things for my health. There's one thing that I've struggled with for 12, 13 years now, that like it's low back issues that I have not been able to overcome completely. And
Yeah.
there have been times when I've been really disappointed. There have been times that I've just struggled, and there have been times that I've frankly just given up, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I felt like I didn't know what I wanted, right? But the
Yeah.
thing that has kept me moving forward is kind of what you were saying, like just visualizing, like, what is it that I
Right.
really want? I'm like, I want to play with my kids. I want to be able to pick them up. I want to be able to exercise. I want to be able to
Mm-hmm.
like have a healthy life. It gave me enough motivation to go against the fear of feeling like, you know what? I don't know if I'm ever going to get healed, but I'm going to keep fighting and figuring this out. And that's
Right.
what we all need in this time of life when we're in the unknown.
Well, and the truth is, so much of life is unknown. Ultimately, what we get to control is ourselves in that moment
Yeah.
and how we choose to show up. And part of living our life to the fullest is showing up with courage and saying, like, regardless of the outcome, I'm committing to choosing to show up fully in this moment, no matter what happens. And I felt this in our business in several different seasons where things were really challenging and it was terrifying. Like, what's going to happen? I don't know what's going to happen. But that is not what we need to be focusing on. We need to focus going inward and saying, what I can control is how I choose to show up. And I think this kind of leads us into this last fear, which is the fear of success. And so often people get confused with fear of failure, and what really they have is a true fear of success.
Yep.
And I would say that in my life, when I look past at my whether it's my career, at relationships, I think I disguised it as a fear of failure. It was like, well, I'm really scared of failing at this. The truth is, in a lot of those instances, I knew I wasn't going to fail. I knew I was going to succeed. And if I succeeded, I had to show up, I had to be seen. And that freaked me out. It was ultimately the fear of being seen. It was like, I mean, Ken, I remember honestly when we started this podcast, and I was like, "Oh my gosh," like this, I was freaked out.
Yeah.
And it was like, the truth is, I was scared of our success because I knew that if we're successful in this, that means more people are going to see us. And that means more people, like, we have to get more vulnerable. We have to share more of ourselves, which felt really, really scary to me. It's similar within relationships. It's like if that relationship actually succeeds, then I actually have to be seen fully for who I am. I have to get really intimate, really open, and that is scary. And I think that the fear of success, people don't often think of this one, and they just think, "Oh, I'm scared of failing." And it's like, well, you might be afraid of succeeding.
Yeah. I think I remember trying to pursue some executive leadership roles in the past. And one of my fears for it was just like, I didn't want to be held hostage to expectations that were going to be put on me.
Mm,
Right. I was like, I kind of want to just live my life. I want to be like joking around. And I didn't want to have this other persona. Right. I
right.
feel like I couldn't be my authentic self for the most part. So I think I realized in my life how much the demands or the responsibility that could come with it is sometimes a thing that I just have to be careful with. Right.
Yeah.
And for those of you who are listening, you, again, like Marissa said, it might not be fear of failure. It just might be fear of success. You don't want to step up to the plate. What I will say that can help you is that all of us are designed for greatness, right?
Right.
We're called for greatness. We're called to do those things. So that like you, if that were to happen and you get successful, as long as you focus on your character, man, you will be able to roll with that in strides. And I think
Hmm.
that's going to be the most important thing. So, what are some things that can help Marissa here in this area when it comes to helping people navigate the fear of success?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I would get in touch with, why are you scared of success?
Yeah,
Like, what is it about success that scares you? Ken, you shared for you, it was that you were going to get swept up and, just lost in other people's expectations. For a long time, especially in my early 20s, I was scared of being successful because I was afraid that that meant I had this belief that it was lonely at the top
yeah,
and that people wouldn't get me. I wouldn't feel like I could be connected with people. And maybe I would be intimidating to a potential partner because I was successful. Like I didn't want to get too big because it might intimidate other people. And so I would ask you, if you have a fear of success and you're able to identify that part of it, go deeper. Ask yourself, well, why am I scared of success? What is my belief about success? And how am I scared of that? Like I said, for me, it was the belief that it was lonely at the top. And why would I ever want to be lonely at the top? No. So I would sabotage my success often when I was, kind of in my early 20s. And I will never forget having a coaching call with a coach I had at that time. And she pressed me on this. And she asked me that question, what do you believe about success? And I said that if I get successful, I'll be alone. And she was like, well, there it is right there. That is why you're not moving forward. That's why you're not wanting to progress, because you're afraid that you would be alone, which again, this all comes back to survival. So I think that that's really important. I think the other thing is really figuring out what you want success to look like. So defining this for yourself, and making sure that, like, again, you get to decide what your life looks like. So if success to you means thriving with your family and your work, then like you get to define that. And part of that process in your defining it will be that you end up leading to fewer priorities. And so you're able to stay focused on what really matters to you, which will diminish that fear pretty intensely, I think.
Yeah. And I would say just make sure as you define that success, that you don't define success based on the limiting beliefs.
Right.
Right. Because like what you were just saying, Marissa, if you were to define success with that limiting belief that you're going to be alone, right, then like it would have derailed a lot of your relationships in the past and your success. Right.
Totally.
So like just making sure that, and you've talked about this before, but like therapy or friends, like when you have close people that you can talk to and be like, this is what success looks like for me. And they can call you out if you're like, hey, there's a limiting belief there that you need to break. Right.
Totally.
But then if it's true and real, then like, hey, let's be the biggest support. Let's be your champions. Let's be your confidants to make you get to where you want to go.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and I think, just kind of as we close out here, we've talked through 4 fears. And I think, first of all, it's important to remember feeling fear is normal. This is really a mechanism that is intrinsically designed to help us stay alive and to survive. So have some grace with yourself when these fears arise, or you notice this in your behavior. You feel frustrated because you're not making progress. And I want to encourage you, rather than getting frustrated with yourself or playing that shame game that we talked about, really dive deep and ask, what's really going on here? Is there something that I'm afraid of? And when you figure that out, then ask, why am I afraid of that? And then figure out what that is and why am I afraid of that? And go as deep as you can go. And then hopefully that will help you become aware of what's going on. So my encouragement to all of you who are listening, as you're thinking about your fears that may or may not be showing up in your life, ask yourself, what would you dare if you weren't afraid?
That's such a good question.
If you were brave, what would you do? And I love this question, because often our biggest contribution, our biggest area of power, of joy, of impact is wrapped up inside of that question. And so often our fear it's like it encompasses, it envelops our true purpose, our true impact. And if we can peel that back and get to that place of, if we were brave, what would we do? That's where we get to live into our calling. So that's where I'm gonna kind of leave it for everybody listening today.
I love it, Marissa. As I think about that, for those of you who might not have caught that, I really want you to press into that, because like your fear could unlock your future purpose.
Yeah.
Right. So like dig into where are you truly afraid, because it could really guide you into your potential. I love it, Marissa. That's all we got for this episode. Until next time, Thanks for joining us on Focus on This.
This is the most productive podcast on the internet, so please share it with your friends and be sure to join us in the Full Focus Planner community on Facebook. We have a vibrant community of over 30,000 people just like you who are chasing big goals and living courageously into what they're being called to do.
And can you do us a huge favor? We haven't asked about this for a while, but if you could leave us a 5-star review, that's what I want you guys to do, but also be honest, right? But if you could leave us a 5-star review on any of the major podcast platforms that you use, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, that would be fantastic. It'd be much appreciated so that more people can be impacted and have the best Mondays moving forward.
All right. Well, we will see you guys next week with another great episode. So until then,
stay focused.